All right, so here's the grand picture. I know your textbook covers a lot of this, but talking about collaboration, we've got teams, we have paraprofessionals, we have peers that we can include, families, administration, the list goes on. As a teacher, you're a collaborator at the end of the day. So IEPs, of course, are one area that you will definitely have to be collaborative, because even if you aren't a special ed teacher, you still have to come to IEP meetings. It is required that there is the person leading the special ed teacher, then that's called a facilitator typically, special ed facilitator. Then there's a special ed teacher. Then there is a general ed teacher, and administrators can come if they would like. Family members can come. Even the student can sit on their IEP meeting if they'd like. It's very collaborative. The special ed teacher, of course, writes up the IEP document for the student with the special needs. And then the rest of the team has to agree on it, and they can change things mid-meeting depending on what the team decides. So understand that students with disabilities have a wraparound around them. They have teams, they have family, administration, community members, and a special ed and general ed teacher needs to make sure to bring all of this together and to be willing to listen and learn as well. Paraprofessionals. So I'm sure some of you have encountered a paraprofessional in your time of being in practicums or classrooms, but a paraprofessional is typically somebody who might not have a teaching degree yet. They might be working on it, or maybe they're in a whole different field, but they are there to help specific students and provide support and aid to them. With a paraprofessional, these are some of the things that they are expected to do in the classroom. And then there are also some things that we cannot expect of them as a teacher. So they can help us prepare instructional materials, help us collect data, especially if you're doing a lot of behavioral data or IEP data and goals, they can be a great resource for you. They can help reinforce and reteach concepts. They should not be, teaching the first time around, because they're not the content specialist in the room. But there are also some inappropriate ways to use these paraprofessionals. They're not your classroom assistant. It's not having, the parents come in and say, I'm going to help the classroom for the day. It's not the same situation. They are not responsible for instructional decisions. That's not what they're trained to do. That's not why they're there. And they're not supposed to act as support for peers. That's not necessarily the job, especially if it's another teacher or a co-teacher. They can be supportive and professional, but when it comes to supporting other students that are in the classroom, if they don't have to, that's not exactly how it goes. There are other people that are included in supports that might not be the general ed or special ed teacher. You could have peer buddies in your classroom, people who work with each other. And it is noted that, I do want to say this cautiously, because sometimes paraprofessionals might take offense to this, or schools might, but research shows that if a paraprofessional, which oftentimes is matched up to a student one-on-one. So for example, I taught a class, and I had one student who in his IEP was assigned a paraprofessional for a majority of the day. And that paraprofessional just followed him around everywhere, went to lunch with him, went on breaks with him, sat next to him in the classroom, worked with him literally all day long. He was that paraprofessional did not work with any other student. So if the IEP says that the paraprofessional should be with them every second, then obviously follow the document. But typically it's for transitions in the hallways, or making sure they get to lunch and back, making sure that assignments are finished, supporting the teacher with the instruction that's given, helping the student scribe, or there's endless things that a paraprofessional can do. But if that paraprofessional is the only one that that student interacts with, it can be detrimental to them socially. And also, it decreases their independence. So they're more likely to be so dependent on that person that they don't grow in their independence. So what is recommended, especially in the research, is that paraprofessionals also work with, as we listed here, peer buddies and peer supports. And that is proven if a peer is working with a student with a disability, that the student with the disability will increase socially, and the student without the disability will increase academically. And that's a win-win situation. And at that point, the paraprofessional can manage and make sure everything's going well with them. So if you ever have a paraprofessional and they're in your classroom, you could say, hey, thanks so much for being so dedicated to the student. I really appreciate how well you work with them. I think let's try something new. I have 2 students who they're just very compassionate, they're very kind, they're doing well in school. I would like to pair them together on this assignment and have them work together. Could you oversee that? Then you are, doing something very research-based, and it's utilizing the paraprofessional in a very positive light. Of course, there are times where it has to be one-on-one and it's only them, but this is another option for you. Here we are talking about family. It's very good to keep family lines of communication open, because there are different spectrums of families. Just like anything else, you have the families who rarely ever contact you unless something is drastically wrong. And then you have the families who are constantly talking to you, maybe weekly or daily, and just need that affirmation that their student is doing okay. You have all kinds of levels. So just like with accommodation with students, you can also accommodate to parents. If you find that you have a classroom of students with parents who are very highly involved, they want to know a lot of information, and they're calling you quite often, something you could do to accommodate them and also alleviate some of the time-consuming aspect that comes with that. Create either a classroom newsletter, create your own website page as a teacher, and post their assignments that are coming up. You could talk about activities that are coming, ways that parents could support, send certain school supplies in. You could highlight some fun activities that you're doing. It's a way to keep the parents engaged, but not having to, have them calling as often, which is not a bad thing because it shows that they really care. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that you're managing your time efficiently. So this could be a good way to help include and collaborate with parents while also continuing with your grading and your assignments and your planning and everything else you have to do. Let's take a look here at our next one. So this is co-teaching. So what is co-teaching? I'm going to actually scroll through there. So co-teaching, like we said, is about a pair of individuals who have equal credentials. So that would be a special education teacher and a general ed teacher. Both are highly trained, highly effective, should be highly effective individuals who can come together and teach a classroom. So we're not referring to a paraprofessional and a general ed teacher or really anybody else, because those 2 types are together to plan. I must say, do note that you can also get outside the box and do interdisciplinary. So if you teach high school, you could have the history teacher and the English teacher collaborate on a class. You might have a history project, but the English teacher brings in some really cool writing techniques that she's teaching in her class and bring that into the social study teacher's room. And that's co-teaching and collaboration. You also have your special ed teacher and your general ed teacher. It can go on and on either way. So the steps to do this is you have to plan together. Like we said, if there is not co-planning, then it's most likely it could be ineffective. And I'll talk to you about the different types of co-teaching here in a second, and you'll see why it can become ineffective very quickly. The second thing you do after you plan, so you have to set aside some time, maybe every week, maybe 30 minutes before school, once or twice a week, you and your co-teacher get together and figure out a plan for your classroom. Then you teach it according to your plan. And then you come together maybe one day a week, maybe on a Friday, you go over the scores and discuss, did this work for us? And maybe we need to reroute. Those are the 3 steps. If you can do those 3 things and make sure your co-teacher is willing to do it with you, then you'll be in good shape. Sometimes you have to communicate the value, because you'll find when you get out there, teachers get very stressed, they're very busy. They think, I have only 55 minutes a day for my plan. I have 4 other classes and maybe 2 other co-teachers. I just don't have time for this. But maybe you could think of a good way, or maybe, if you have a really tough case of a co-teacher, bring some snacks once a week until do whatever you have to do to make it an inviting environment. Say, hey, I'm just going to bring, a couple sodas and some snacks. Let's get together right after school or right before, bring donuts, whatever it might be, and say, let's just go over a few of these details. I think it's really going to help our classroom. And it just has to be done. So find a way to get your co-teacher on board with these 3 steps. So remember too that, like I think I mentioned a second ago, paraprofessionals are not co-teachers. So they're there to provide support. So you don't have to co-plan with them, but you can tell them what's going on and how they can help in the classroom. Also, to be an effective co-teaching situation, it has to be where both people are highly engaged. Because if you have one person teaching and one person who's just watching you teach, that's not utilizing their resource effectively. They should have, as good of a degree as you do. They've been through school, potentially 4 years like you have. So there's no use of having somebody sitting on the sidelines during the class. We got to figure out how to use each other effectively. So question for you, what do you think? You can answer this to yourself, or I was going to have this on the reading guide, but I actually want to answer it for you so that you know what it is. But the first question is, a paraprofessional and a teacher working together in the same classroom is an example of co-teaching. True or false? So actually, I'm going to leave this open to you to write down. I'm not going to answer it for you, but you'll see on your feedback on the reading guide. Kind of making a last-minute decision on that right now. So you've answered that question. So instruction occurs for single groups of students. The goal is to include all students in instruction and make sure that all can succeed. So we have to, like we talked about before, it is a collectivist room. You have a whole class of people, but also you have to make sure it's working for all students. So if you have 2 students who are floundering on the side and just aren't doing very well, what are you and your co-teacher going to do to make sure to help those few students? What kind of plan are you going to create? What strategies are you going to implement? And these are things that you can talk about during your co-teaching sessions. Also, it's supposed to largely occur in one place. Some instruction can occur outside of the classroom if you do field trips, or maybe you do a project that, you do a scavenger hunt through the school and you have a very set, maybe it's in the gym so that you can see everybody, but they're able to do certain things. It can occur outside of the classroom, but overall it needs to occur within it. And you'll see also when it comes to co-teaching that one of the strategies for co-teaching is to remove a portion of the students outside of the room and leave the rest there. But at that point, you're getting back to an exclusive situation where it's not inclusion anymore. So it's somewhat defeating the purpose. It happens rarely, but it can happen. All right, another question for you. So an example of co-teaching is when the gen ed teacher plans and teaches the class on Monday, and the special ed teacher plans and teaches the class on Tuesday. Is that true or false? So you can answer that. And then also this one. So it is co-teaching when the general educator and special educator discusses the student's goals, and the student goes into the general ed classroom for a period of time, while the special educator remains in the resource room teaching other students. So is that still considered co-teaching, true or false? All right, so you'll answer that on your own in your reading guides. So co-teaching also defined, these are the last 2 points of that. They have joint responsibility and joint accountability. Both people share the success of whether students are doing well in that classroom. If there are large problems or lack of progress, it's not just a general ed teacher that is responsible for this. It is both parties, because typically when this happens, the class is moving so fast and the teachers are not meeting at any point to check test scores, quiz scores, make sure everything's going well. They're not stopping to create a behavior plan for their classroom for maybe 3 students who are having a lot of trouble. At that point, it's a shared responsibility. It's not one or the other. Both people needed to come together and figure this out. It also involves some varied participation, because as much as we would like it to be 50-50, it's not always 50-50. Teachers can take turns, but both teachers are not going to teach everything. There might be days where the teacher delivers the content and the teacher is supporting, but maybe a couple, maybe 30 minutes later, the special ed teacher gets up and helps the students all with a strategy. Maybe it teaches them how to chunk information or highlight text or underline words in the reading group as a whole class before they go into their groups. So it's sometimes varied. So don't expect, if you have a co-teacher and say, well, they're not pulling their weight, they're not doing everything that I'm doing. Also remember that special ed teachers write IEPs for everybody on their caseload, and those are 8 to 12 page documents, and they collect goals and data on every student in your classroom. So what you do as a general ed teacher, what a general ed teacher would do, is plan a lot of the curriculum, get everything ready. The teacher can also, the special ed teacher can also participate in that, but understand the special ed teacher has a lot of responsibilities when it comes to data collection, making sure goals on their IEP are being implemented, making sure all strategies on the IEP, writing a 12-page document on every student every year. So they have a lot going on as well. So keep that in mind. And when you do split up tasks, it's not always going to be split right down the middle, because each task looks a bit different. Now this is fairly fascinating. So there are 6 types of classroom models, and this is going to be very important for you to remember. This is a hint situation, and also you'll be seeing it on your reading guide as well. I'm going to go through the 6 and then show you a picture of what they would look like. We have one teaches, as you can imagine, one's in the front, one is observing. We have station teaching, where there's different stations and the teachers either are in 2 of the stations and the rest are managed by maybe a strong peer, and then the teachers can move around between groups. Parallel teaching, when the teachers are teaching the same content to 2 different people. Alternative teaching, which one teacher could be in the front giving main lecture while the other teacher could be working on specific skills with students. There's team teaching, where they literally go back and forth teaching instruction, and they're both up in front of the classroom. And then one teach, one assist, which the one at the bottom and the one at the top are not recommended often, because that means somebody's not engaged. When one is teaching and one is assisting, this can be helpful sometimes, but it's not our go-to. So this is what it looks like. If you were to take a look at this, I'm going to give you some of the advantages and cautions with each one. So first of all, here's the one teach, one observe. I think this is going to be very beneficial to your career, because you can start thinking when you go have your planning session with your co-teacher, you could say, even print out the sheet and bring it up to them later and say, which one of these do we want to do? And uh, I I will give you this document that I have talking about advantages and cautions. So if you want to give that to your co-teacher one day and say, well, I don't agree that one teach, one assist is the best scenario because of this, and you'll have all the answers in front of you. All right, so let's start here. This is the very last thing on this lecture that we're doing. One teach, one assist. So an advantage of this is that they're an extra set of hands and eyes in the classroom that can collect data on students that they might not be able to do while they're up in the front teaching. And it allows them to be able to take notes. But the problem is, if it's used too often, one teacher becomes more of a teacher's assistant than a true teacher. And this happens a lot with special education teachers. We call them the coffee mug teachers. You've got one person doing everything, and then you've got the teacher, and actually I have a coffee mug right here. Then you've got person number 2 in the back, just drinking their coffee and watching it all happen, kind of scouting out the students, making sure everything's flowing well, and then that's literally all that they're doing. That happens, and that is not the most effective way to handle a classroom. Station teaching. So advantages. It does provide smaller groups so that students can have some more individualized attention, which is nice. It provides more intense instruction, helps engage students because you could have some kind of projects or interactive activities at each station, which is nice. Some of the negatives of this that you have to keep in mind, that the noise levels could become too loud, and it's okay to have, your noise levels raised as long as it's not out of control noise, where you have 2 students from group C throwing things at each other and you have them screaming or fighting. At that point, you probably need to put a new strategy in place for behavior strategy during groups, like positive reinforcement, a token economy. You could put on the board team A, team B, team C, and every time you see each group doing something great, or they're every 60 seconds, if you look up and they're doing great, you take a tally mark. And then at the end, whoever has the most tally marks, or if they get 10 or above, they could get 10 extra minutes on recess. Do something to motivate so you can keep behavior control over your groups. Another caution when we talk about station teaching, the pacing can be difficult because let's say 2 groups work really fast, but team C doesn't have a teacher with them. Maybe this is team C, and plus they don't know exactly what they're doing. They feel lost. So they might be behind. So pacing is difficult. I would suggest it can also be difficult if the 2 teachers are here and this one is not supervised. So if they have questions, could have troubles, I would put some high ability students in those groups to help lead the teams. I have done that in the past too, where you actually, after you do this a couple times, you say, wow, I see that you're such a leader, and really reinforce positive behavior with some of the students and say, because you did such a great job, you get to be leader this week. And then they're going to start trying to do well so that they can be the leader the next time this happens. So let's look at parallel teaching. An advantage to this is it does give us smaller groups. So each teacher is teaching the same content to equal amount of students. It does allow you to provide more intense instruction and split up the groups, and it increases engagement, yes, but some cautions that we have for you here in parallel teaching. Both teachers have to be familiar with the content. So a lot of times this is easier in elementary because most likely you both have been trained in this. In high school, it's harder. Like I mentioned before, if I'm teaching geometry and that's not my content area because I'm a special ed teacher. For example, I was trained as an elementary teacher with a special ed degree. So I was not trained in math. So it would have been very hard for me to do this, though I have had to do that in the past, and that's when you have to either talk to the teacher to make sure you're on the same board, or you gotta go learn it yourself so that you can teach it. Another caution with this type of parallel teaching would be that they need to finish around the same time, or set a timer, do something so that it's on the same pace. Noise level can be a problem because if you're in the same room, it's very hard for them to focus with two different lectures going on at the same time. So if you have a divider curtain, if you have something to break up that noise, it's more likely that this could be effective. So last three here, we have this alternative teaching. This is okay too. We have some advantages here. It assists students to review for skills they need extra help with. So they're learning content. These students are learning some extra skills. It can be designed that the small group is there to assess skill and make sure students are grasping the content. So maybe most of them are in there learning it, but you know that a couple are really struggling in math. And we talked about Marco a minute ago, right? Marco hates math, he hates being in there, and he doesn't understand. He's made that very clear. His behavior is escalating. So at one of those situations, it might be a good idea to have alternative teaching where a couple students in that same scenario could come together, learn some skills, but don't only pull in special ed students, because at that point, it's basically stigmatizing. If you pull students from both general ed and special ed, the students will think nothing of it. They'll just think they're getting rotated into this smaller group, and that's the way you want it to be for sure. Some cautions with alternative teaching. Students need to return to the whole group quickly so they don't miss key instruction. That's the hard part with this. If this teacher is teaching new content and you pull students out, that might get them further behind. So you have to, maybe on a day that you're reviewing, that the main teacher is reviewing content, would be a good time to have this, not when the content is new, because you're going to get them further behind. Another caution, do not use the same group of students over and over. We just talked about that, especially if they all have a disability. You want to make sure that it's not, like we said, stigmatizing for them. Teaming. This is one of the most effective ways, and this is usually the goal in collaboration and co-teaching, that we can team. And they teach together and play off their strengths, and they teach at the same time. So that takes a lot of planning, because you have to say, I'm doing this part, you're doing this part, and I'll do the intro, you do the content, I'll do the closing, and you go back and forth. A benefit to this is that each teacher can present content in different ways, and it gives a whole new point of view. Maybe the first teacher does a PowerPoint, but the second teacher leads them in a song about it. It allows you to do more things, different things. It could be the same content, different content. You can decide. A caution with this is that it is still large group instruction. So it has to be well planned. Otherwise, if you say, oh, are you going to do this next? Or are you going to jump in? Or do you want me to do it? It just starts to look disjointed, and it causes very rough transitions if it is not well planned. But it is, I would say, the number one best way to run your classroom in a co-teaching situation. And then the last one here is one teach, one assist. This is the one that should be used the least. A benefit of it, though, is that it provides extra help for students who need it, and extra help for the teacher to make sure all needs are being met. So let's say the teacher is giving direct instruction about a book, and they say, open your textbook, go to this page, make sure you are reading this line, let's read it together. But then the other teacher is able to scout out who is not opening their textbook, who is not on the right page, and they go around and help and make sure everything is going smoothly and every student is on board, which I think this can be useful sometimes, but it shouldn't be an everyday habit that this is always how you teach. And if you don't plan, it will either resort to this or it will resort to this. So keep that in mind. That's why we plan. And then one caution, besides what I've already shared, is that it can become more of an assistant role for that teacher than a true teacher. Students start to see the special ed teacher as not someone they can respect. If that goes on too long, the special ed teacher will look like an aide. I actually have seen this happen with one of my special ed co-teachers. They did this so often that students thought that they were just a college practicum student, even though they were actually a teacher. So you don't want to be that way. You just want to make sure your co-teacher will plan with you. So I hope this is helpful to you and gives you a great perspective of the different types, how you can do this, what you can do. Keep this in mind because maybe your co-teacher won't know this, and it will be up to you to say, hey, we've got 6 options here. What should we do? And how do you want to run this classroom? You should have that conversation before the first day of school even happens, and set a general pattern for how you all want to do it, and then you can plan weekly to make sure it happens. So I know this is a lot, but this is a key factor because I guarantee you will have a co-teacher, especially if you're a special ed teacher, you will for sure be in the situation often, and you have to fight for yourself sometimes because otherwise it's easy for some general ed teachers who haven't had a class like this, and general ed teachers who are taking this class, I believe are going to be the best. I mean, I would love to co-teach with you, you know, as a special ed teacher, but there are some out there who are not easy to work with. So you have to advocate for yourself as a special ed teacher and say, hey, these are the 6 options. I would rather choose one of these 4, and occasionally we can touch on one of these. So take this, and I hope you've learned a lot from it. Ask me if you have any questions as usual, and keep doing a great job. I'm really impressed with you all. I think your reading guides are going really well. I also wanted you to know that I have started looking through the surveys, and I'm going to keep analyzing that data and make some instructional decisions in the next week, or probably next week, and a few this week as well. So thank you for your responses. Thank you for your honesty. Yeah, you're doing wonderful. Keep going. And that's all that I have for now, and I will see you all soon.